Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very first Marmalade Awards webinar. We're very delighted to have you and to have three of our judges with us. So I'm going to introduce the judges who will be doing most of the talking, and then we'll give you the chance, as Kate said, to ask questions. So we want to split the session basically into two halves. One where our judges will talk to you about the awards and the judging and how they approach the task of assessing your wonderful creations. Firstly, I want to introduce Jane Hazel McCosh from Dalemain Estate in England. Jane is the founder of the world's original Marmalade Awards, and which began this whole journey of marmalade in 2005, Jane, is that correct?
That's right, yes. Yes.
So Jane and Dalemain is where all this began. So I'll let Jane tell you a bit more about that, and then we'll hand over to our other two judges, Stephen Downs, who's from Beerenberg, which most Australians will know as, I think, the leading preserve maker in Australia. Steve has a wonderful title of Culinologist, which I think I'll get Steve to explain when he comes on. But basically, what Stephen does is make sure that all the marmalade, all the products at Beerenberg taste terrific. And finally, but not least, is Liz Harfull. Liz Harfull may be known to some of you. She's a best-selling author of a number of books around traditions in cooking, particularly the Blue Ribbon Cookbook, which features recipes made famous at Australian agricultural shows. So Liz knows a lot about cooking, and she's also a brilliant researcher around the history of food. So we're very lucky to have these three people as our head judges. We're very delighted that you are able to join us tonight, and I'm going to hand over first to Jane to give us a bit of a background to the awards and the Marmalade Festival. Jane.
Thank you, and hello everyone, and good morning from me and good evening to you. It's lovely to be part of this webinar, and I'm very, very excited to be sharing all sorts of ideas with you all. But it would be interesting perhaps to know where we all began, and I have one or two pictures that I'd like to share with you of the place where it all started, when I started the Marmalade Awards. And this is the house where I live, Dalemain, and it has the wonderful situation of having an incredible archive. So we're going to flip through some photographs of the different things that go on. This is an archive of marmalade recipes that go back to about 1600, and that's why really we started this competition. We decided we wanted to actually champion marmalade today and find out who is making it and how we could actually improve making marmalade. So we started in England, and we'll move on to the next slide. And soon we found that actually people were so excited by it that they started to send their marmalade to our competition from all over the country. So we thought, well, perhaps we should be starting to make it a bit bigger, and we opened it to other countries, and soon people were sending them from all over the world. I slipped this one in because clearly James Bond had his marmalade to give us as well. Okay, next slide. We have our WI judges, the CWA in the UK, and Eileen and Doreen have been part of our team since the very beginning. We also, next slide, have other judges. Pam standing up is known as Pam the Jam in Australia, in England, and she's working with someone called Ivan Day, who is a food historian, but also another judge. And this is in our big dining room, and you can see in the background a portrait there, which is Elizabeth Rainbow, who wrote the cookery book in 1600. Next slide. So eventually all the marmalade is judged, and we put it out on display, and it looks incredibly beautiful, ranging from the very dark and chunky to the much more clear Seville orange. And Pride of Place probably is our Seville orange category, which always seems to be the most popular. And again, so the winner gets given, the winner of the world, as it were, gets presented with a golden cup, which has the nursery rhyme, oranges and lemons, on around the top of it. And this was presented to me by the Worshipful Company of Fruiterers, who are patrons of the festival, based obviously in London, and they support the international festival. Next slide. We do it for 5 different reasons. The first is for charity. So we support hospice work, and we support it all over the world now. So when people enter their marmalade, they get to their entry money, all their entry money goes to the hospice that they have put on the bottom of their form. So for instance, when the people enter from Australia, they can send their money to end-of-life care somewhere in Australia rather than giving it to us. And over the years, we've now raised about £250,000. Next slide. We're very, very keen on education. And so, in fact, these children are making marmalade buns. They're not actually making marmalade, but they're definitely going to be using marmalade. You can see the jars in the middle. Next slide. And they are also write about it. Next slide. And they also create things. Now, this little girl came from Scotland, and she persuaded her friends to pay the entry money for her. So she then drew their portraits on the side of the London bus that she entered her marmalade in. Next slide. We also do it for community. That's the third reason we are doing this festival, which is really become a community of marmalade makers all over the world. But this is an example in our local town, Penrith. Penrith goes orange. You can see the town crier on the left-hand side with his bell going round. And we also have, of course, Paddington Bear in the middle, and he is one of our patrons, and he is always with us at the festival. But we also have the Mayor of Yawatahama, who is in charge of the Japanese festival, holding on to Paddington Bear. And we have the High Commissioner of India on the left-hand side. So it is a very multicultural community. Next slide. And this is our local school. So we include the school, the Girl Guides, the Lions Club, which again is an international organisation, the WI, and we have a church service on the Sunday, a Marmalade Festival service. So it is the whole community. Next slide. So we're wanting to encourage home producers. This lady is a home producer. And over the years, we have found the level of the standard of marmalade making is quite extraordinary, how it has gone up and up and up. And the most fabulous marmalades are coming to Dalemain. Next slide. And you can see from here how many different countries take part. We've got a huge range from the European countries to the far-reaching parts of the world. Next slide. And this is a rather beautiful layout. Next slide. We have a celebration and a ceremony for presenting prizes, and that happens in the main dining room. And people, again, do come from all over the world for this event. Next slide. And eventually, the winner of winners gets reproduced by a company in London, in the UK, and we sell it at Fortnum & Mason. So this is Fortnum & Mason with a little model of Dalemain sitting in the heart of the shop, which is rather pleasing. And a percentage of the sales, again, go to hospice work. Next slide. We have huge support from so many people, including His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who at that point we were discussing the fact that we both like to eat marmalade with sausages. Next slide. And this is the team of winners in Japan, where we had our, the first Japanese festival. We had to cancel it this year, so the first one was in 2019. So that was good. Next slide. And I took a little mini Dalemain with me. This is a wooden doll's house. You can see just the top of it. And all the winners are displayed in the windows of the house. And this was Australia, and this was our first year when we had, now 5 years ago, Darren, I think, wasn't it, when we had our first winner. And the rosettes are such a lovely thing that I think that what is happening between festivals is good ideas come up between festivals. And so we were thinking how lovely that would be perhaps to have with our festival. Next slide. The final, the new addition to our next slide, our festivals is in Senegal. And you can see that this happened in January. Next slide. And it's exactly the same. Everybody tasting marmalade with a good bit of taste. So that's been a hugely exciting development. And the marmalade song was sung in Senegal in January. Next slide. So this is me standing outside the Australian High Commission, the closest I can get to Australia right now, but it has been a very good relationship with the High Commission because they have helped us to launch the festival, the international festival, from that building 2 years ago. And so it's wonderful to have that presence of Australia, which is made, I think, built with Australian building materials. You know, the marble and everything in it has been brought over from Australia. So I feel that I am quite close to Australia when I'm in this building. So that's where it finishes. So I think that what I think is most exciting about this is that we are a community and we're working together with good marmalade all over the world, and I'm thrilled to be working with the South Australian National Trust to make this possible. It makes such good sense because we can all pool ideas, and it's such an exciting good news story, and goodness knows we need that good stories right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm going to ask you now if you would like to introduce Liz, and we'll transition to Liz.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be introducing Liz because she has done what I would love to do, which is basically meet the people who really count, who are making things and cooking things and preserving things. From sort of a heritage point of view, but also because that is the natural thing to do. And so the wonderful books that you write and the way you're writing them have clearly won the hearts of people all over the world. This isn't just sort of books for Australia. This is books for the world, and I'm deeply admiring of you. So rather than me talking, I think you should talk.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. I thought I'd just start by talking about what I call the quirky bits of history. I love to make history interesting. And I was actually surprised to discover that, you know, one of our biggest advantages when it comes to marmalade in Australia is that we have amazing fruit to make it from. And we can grow it ourselves. We don't need a glass house. It isn't something exotic. Most backyards have a lemon tree or an orange tree or a market close by where you can buy it from producers. And it started from day one because Captain Arthur Phillip arrived in the colony with citrus trees that he picked up in Brazil on the way to Australia. So they've been in Australia since 1788. That is the Western varieties. And then, of course, there is a sector of citrus fruit that we are only just beginning to appreciate as Australians who have come to this country in recent times, and that's the bush foods, the native bush ingredients like finger lime and desert lime and wild orange. And we would dearly love to see some marmalades made from those fruits, which have been food for Indigenous Australians for tens of thousands of years. We'd love to see some marmalades that pick up on some of those fruits, which are now becoming much more readily available, and you can also buy the plants and grow them yourself. But after Arthur Phillip arrived, by the 1820s, most common varieties of citrus were being grown in Australia, and manufacturing started quite quickly. I found this lovely little news story from Maitland in New South Wales from the 1830s saying that the locally produced Trevelyan marmalade could hold its head up high against the best Scottish marmalade. And in fact, it was probably better because it didn't have to undergo a long sea journey to get to Australia. So they've been promoting the local marmalade above the original sort of Scottish marmalades for a very long time. And then the other little story I found that I thought you might be interested in, which I didn't really know about either, was how big a thing marmalade was for our troops in the First World War serving overseas. In 1914, within weeks of war breaking out, a woman, Mrs. Perry, had organised to collect 1 tonne of oranges from growers in the Parramatta district and from the Prime Minister's garden, and co-opted local tin makers and every copper in the district to make marmalade to send to the troops overseas within weeks of war breaking out. And by 1918, Australian troops were consuming huge quantities of marmalade. In fact, in August 1918, so not long before the war ended, the Colonial War Office in Australia tried to buy 2 million pounds, that's the weight, so over 450 tonnes of marmalade to feed the troops. And they were told by the authorities that was completely impossible. There was no way they could supply 2 million pounds worth of marmalade, and they'd have to take some jam instead. But I'm not sure the troops always appreciated it. I found a magazine that was produced in the Middle East for the New Zealand and Australian troops over there, with a comic satirical piece about marmalade and how absolutely sick of it they were. So they were probably not unhappy about getting the jam instead of the marmalade at that point. So it's been a part of our culture and who we are for a very long time. I love old cookbooks, and I'm just going to quickly show you a couple that you may know. This is the Green and Gold, which is a heritage icon in South Australia. It's been continuously in print since the early 1920s. And of course, it has marmalade recipes. A lot of the recipes are reflect what people were growing at home. So a lot of things using oranges and lemons, including not just the recipes for marmalade, but jam and marmalade was used a lot to flavour other dishes, particularly puddings and cakes. And Jane, you'll be very pleased to know that there's a marmalade sauce recipe in there. And it's very similar to a sauce that my mother used to serve. She would make a big shearer's cake version of orange cake, and then she would make this sauce for us to have on the ends for pudding the night after she'd made the cake. There were boiled and steamed puddings. Some of them came from this book, which is in a very tatty state. I'm sorry about that, but it's the oldest continuously published cookbook in Australia. First came out in 1904, has never been out of print, has sold something like 700,000 plus copies. And it was part of, I guess, a strong women's movement that was emerging, and it raised money to send women overseas as missionaries in their own right. Came out of Victoria. Every household in Victoria up until the 60s would have had this. And marmalade again, and citrus, is quite prominent in this book. And then there's one of my personal favourites, a CWA cookbook from Bundaberg in Queensland. Came out in 1929, still in print. The secretary in her 80s is still collecting orders every time she goes to the post office. And again, it has a very popular recipe for marmalade pudding, which is a steam pudding made with marmalade. So there's a long tradition of not only making the marmalade, but finding creative ways to use it. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to know where these things come from. And I have to say, I know a lot of you who enter the awards use recipes from the Green and Gold, the preserves section in this book. If you are comfortable converting from the old measurements to metric, a lot of people swear by the preserved recipes in this book. So, and I'm sure you can obviously still buy it, and a lot of people who live in South Australia would probably already have a copy. Okay, so that's kind of it from me. Darren, would you like me to introduce Stephen at this point? Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Stephen Downs, the culinologist, the culinary technologist from Beerenberg Jams, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself and the world of commercial marmalade.
Thank you, Liz, very much. It's a pleasure to work with so many smart and very passionate people, not just smart in marmalade, but in life and their stories and their recipes. And, you know, it's just a wonderful organisation that Jane started many years ago. And I'm very blessed to be a part of it each year judging, but I'll miss you this year, Jane, obviously. And has it been 3 or 4 years? I can't remember how many years.
It's 4.
4 years. So this is the 5th year? Wow.
This is the 5th year.
Wow. So hopefully 2021 will be, you're back here and we'll be doing it together. I don't need to talk about myself much. I work for Beerenberg. I do a lot of development in recipes and marmalade's one of them. I like marmalade. Not everyone likes marmalade, but it's as Liz said, Australia and South Australia, particularly with the Riverland, and is an excellent place to get citrus. And we're very lucky there. I think when me and Jane judge marmalade, we don't say much. We have a spoon each before we say anything. But I can tell from Jane's face that it's a good marmalade. There's something about the cheeks light up or the eyes brighten or something, but I don't need to actually say anything. And we both kind of nod and we know it's a very, very good marmalade. Perhaps a gold or perhaps a silver. We'll go through the points and we'll work out where it sits. But that's one of the fun things about judging, is to see Jane's face light up, because there's joy there. And you can't beat that. And I think over the 4 years, I think we've only ever disagreed twice on whether we thought it was good or not a good marmalade. Would you agree with that, Jane?
I do, yep.
So
it's a very amicable judging experience.
Yes. So I've learned a lot over the 4 years, and I'm lucky enough to judge at the Royal Adelaide Show, and once again that's been cancelled this year. But I also enjoy that, and you do a big variety of different chutneys, sauces, vinegars. So it's a lot of different stuff, which is also enjoyable. What else would you like to know, everyone? It was funny enough when you were talking about oranges in the UK and in the 16th century. I was lucky enough to work in Scotland, and they had this is a 14th, 15th century castle. I can't remember what century. But they had a walled garden, and they used to light fires in the wall. And obviously that was to grow oranges and stuff, I found out when I worked there. So isn't it interesting how they made it work in such a cold, bitter winter as Scotland to grow oranges? So that was very interesting, because they were coal miners. So they must have, I don't know, burnt coal in the wet weather to keep the oranges warm.
Well, I think Jane could probably tell us about her own citrus experience. I've seen Jane's citrus garden. So how does the citrus?
I have to say that I have to say that I think that Ian Tolley, who is obviously the absolute world expert on oranges, would not be impressed by my greenhouse, because I don't think my orange trees look very happy. And he often says, please send me a photograph of them so that he can give me some advice. I don't dare, because I don't think they really look happy enough. But I have to say, I have 1 orange this year, so I feel that I'm moving on.
Okay. Well done. We'll tell Ian that. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Jane, for that introduction. We are now going to hand over to questions from participants. So please sharpen your pens in the chat box. I already have 2 questions here from Linda Costa. So Linda's first question, I'm just going to read, and then I'll let the panelists decide who wants to take it first. Linda asks, what is a good general length of time to cook marmalade before a competition? I know that marmalade will last for years, but for good flavour maturation, would about 1 month more or less be a good time frame? Jane, do you want to take that one first?
I think it's very interesting that actually marmalade is an ambient product, and so you could put any date on it, and you're not going to die from eating it, as it were. And now that we have all these modern inventions, such as screw-top lids, I think it preserves marmalade in a way that it never used to. So that in the past, obviously, the cellophane lid would let in the air, and it would change the stability of the marmalade. I don't know what you both think.
Sorry, Jane. It could be the question of the development of the flavour, whether it's best to make it a week before, month, 6 months. It depends, I suppose, on how good the marmalade is. I think it would be better sometime before. It wouldn't be better, a couple of months before the competition at least. I think the flavour would come through more, I would think.
For me, I think what is more critical is the speed that you get the fruit from the tree into the pot to make the marmalade. That's where the rush needs to happen. The freshest the fruit and the earlier the season that it's picked, the better. So the time urgency is more at that part of the process than after you've made it.
I don't know whether, Darren, you ever receive hot jars. We do at Dalemain, where people literally have made it the night before.
Yes, there's that. Yes, last day people come in with them steaming. So yes, that's perhaps not ideal.
It would be interesting to mark those ones and just see, register them and just see what their taste was. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so hopefully, Linda, that's answered your question. Perhaps, Kate, if you want to let Linda have a microphone, she might want to follow up with any other questions you might want to ask. Linda, are you there? Kate is trying to unmute Linda.
Just bear with me a moment, please.
Okay, sorry. I'll read Linda's other question whilst we're trying to do that. The other question is, it's about categories in the competition. She asks, could there not be more classes for more specific varieties of citrus? So this is a question we contemplate every year about which categories. Once again, maybe Jane, I'll let you start that one off about whether we should have, oh, here's Linda now. Maybe I'll let Linda ask the question directly. Hello, Linda.
Hello, everybody. How exciting it is to be with you all tonight for my time. You've answered my question about when's a good time to start making your marmalade for competition. Thank you for your answers. My other question was a small one, and it was about the labelling of the jars. I understand it's important for each exhibit to be anonymous. From my understanding so far, we need 3 labels on the jar. One is the main label, saying the class number and name, for instance, Class 1 Seville Orange. On the base of the jar, we need to have a sticker saying our name and telephone number. And I believe on the back, another small label describing the ingredients. Please just confirm if this is correct.
That's certainly, that's right. And each one is absolutely vital, really, so that when it's logged, it's a very simple process to log it.
Okay.
Hey, Linda,
sorry.
We had one gentleman that put his picture on the front of his marmalade to get it. Remember that, Jane? I think it was 2 years ago. Yes, not only was his name, it was his photo as well, just so we wouldn't use it.
The ingredients are definitely important, if not the picture of the maker, because we need to be able to judge whether the marmalade tastes of the ingredients. It delivers on the promise. So that's critical too.
Okay, thank you very much. You can
Okay.
Well, could I just add one last thing about when to make it, that actually there is a danger, we talked about hot marmalade, but the problem is with that it hasn't then found its set. Isn't that right? And it does need a marmalade, as with any preserve, it has to set and be allowed to set. So if it's moved around and turned upside down or whatever it is, that's going to break it up.
I'm just wondering, Jane, whether it would be helpful to describe the process as judges that we go through, the steps there's clear steps of how we look at a jar of marmalade when we're judging it.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Let's go ahead. Please do.
I've got the winning one from this year, which I could do what we do. So first of all, we look at the labels, which this is actually now the commercial label. So it's not exactly what you've just described, but it has the name, and it would have the name on the bottom, your name. And you look at it, and we're looking, because you feed with you eat with your eyes, you want to make sure that you think this looks like a nice jar to be eating. It's then important that when you take this top off, if you listen, if I can do it, it's stuck. There. Did you hear the pop?
I heard it.
I did, yes.
Okay. It's a pop. And that's important too, that it has a proper seal. And then you immediately want to see what the aroma is. And so as soon as you've taken off that top. So in doing that, you have looked at your ingredients, because what you're trying to find out is, can I actually detect those ingredients? Would you say, Liz? Keep me straight, Liz.
It's always
so
it's always a great impact for us as judges if we take the lid off and we get that immediate sense of the citrusy smell, or if it's a marmalade with a twist, there might be an undernote of something else, that an alcohol or a herb or a spice of some sort. So that's really the first sort of sense that we get of the quality of the marmalade.
And Stephen, I'm right in saying that we have had one or two which the lid has been a lid used for a chutney, and it's extraordinary how you can, as soon as you smell that, it will remain in that lid, and it will completely destroy your marmalade.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Don't do it.
Yes, the old pickle onion jar is not a good idea to put marmalade into. You can smell it straight away, and it just permeates all through the taste, and you can't even try it.
And it's so sad, because people have put so much effort in to then lose it by just having that smell, and then it taints the marmalade. But then what we do is we would be going into the marmalade. This is the moment. This is the exciting moment in my view, because you're dipping your spoon in. You're saying, well, is it set? What does it feel like? What is it feeling like to your spoon? So you're still waiting for the moment of actually tasting. You're feeling the texture. You're saying, is it set, or has it? Add to my descriptions. What would you be looking for, Stephen?
Well, I mean, I think, Jane, you explained this. Marmalade is meant to be eaten on toast, and if it isn't a consistency that's going to stay on your toast and be spreadable, or not turn the toast soggy, or think about what it's being made for.
Yeah.
You'd be also looking for the pill size and the distribution through the jar. It hasn't floated. That would mean that would be caused by filling it too hot. So all the peel might be undercooked as well, and it'll float to the surface as such, because it hasn't been saturated by the sugar solution. So that'll cause floating. So all them little things we look for, and the evenness of the cut in the peel, to be totally barbaric and judge someone on the consistency of their cutting.
Yeah,
is something to look at.
Attention to detail is kind of everything, especially when you get into the silver and gold medal levels.
Correct.
Yeah. It can be the
small. A lot of good marmalades. You taste a lot of good ones. It's just that the ones that have gone that extra step become the winners.
Because it'd be true to say that if one had a huge hunk of shred, it's quite a big mouthful to eat, but also it won't spread on your toast. I mean, it just won't work for you, I don't think. But so this is well, I don't know whether you can see, it's well sort of cut, and then when I put it onto the plate, it goes down slowly like that. It's not sort of dripping off.
No.
So it's well set. Does that work? Can anybody see that?
It does.
I swear I can smell it, Jane.
And the other thing which I can see, and I don't know whether you can, is that it's sparkling. It's not a dull colour. It's a sparkling colour. And even though this is a dark and chunky marmalade, so you can't see through it, it's not like the jelly marmalades, it still sparkles. And that's
still bright.
that again, yeah, it's again about eating with your eyes. You really want to eat this. I'll just taste it. And it is very good.
We believe you.
That is the final thing that one would do. It's the final thing, obviously, is the actual taste. What does it taste like? Can you taste those ingredients? And you know immediately when you've got a winner.
And I think one of the most critical things, and one of the things that I think is perhaps the most common fault or mistake is a balance of acidity and sweetness. No matter what fruit you're using, you don't want it to be all sugar. But I mean, I guess some people do like an incredibly tart marmalade, but you are trying to strike a balance that respects the fruit that's being used, with just enough sugar to make the perfect marmalade. And it's you don't just want to be tasting sugar.
Okay, well, thank you for those very insightful words and that magnificent demonstration, Jane. I do swear I can smell that marmalade. I've got another question that's come in by someone who's not here. A man called Ken has asked a question for our judges. It's a bit of an agony aunt question. He writes, I cook the orange peel until very soft, but after boiling with the sugar, it becomes hard again. What can I do? So I don't know if anyone knows what that problem is. A diagnosis from our judges would be great.
If it's hard again, I would assume he's boiled off too much water, and it's probably the peel's crystallizing, perhaps. Once it's soft, really. But if it's too much water's gone from it, it might be then too hard, perhaps, is what he means there.
Okay.
Liz might be able to help me out there.
Well, yeah, I suspect that you're right, because I mean, the more common problem that we see is that, depending on the recipe that's used, is the fruit the peel is underdone, so it's too chewy. That's actually quite something that happens quite a lot. Some of my favourite recipes involve you boiling the fruit first until the peel is perfect. A perfect level of tenderness, and then you use that cooked fruit to make the marmalade and add the peel right at the end. But if you have a recipe that involves adding the peel at the beginning, you know, it's a very fine judgment of cooking the marmalade enough till it's set and the peel is cooked to the right consistency. So that takes, you know, you've got to just be carefully checking all the way through the cooking process.
Okay. Jane, do you want to add anything to that?
No, but I would definitely say what he's describing is overcooking, and it just goes beyond that point, and the shred says, well, thanks, but I'm going to crystallize, I'm going to get hard.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully that will help Ken. Next person, Victoria Dalglish. Victoria, she's with us. Perhaps, Kate, you can open Victoria's microphone and she can ask the question about mandarins directly. Hello, Victoria.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I was out at a farm today and the fellow said to me, do you make marmalade? I said, oh, yes, yes, yes. And he offered me these dear little mandarins. He said he didn't know what had happened to the tree. Last year they were quite big and now they're, oh, I don't know, that sort of big. And they're certainly bigger than the kumquats that I used about 10 days ago. Don't ever make kumquats. It's all the work involved. It's just
yes.
Before I go through, because kumquat does take a lot of time, 2 to 2.5 hours to prepare and cut the fruit evenly. And I don't want to do that with these mandarins. What's your views about marmalade with mandarins?
Can I answer this?
Yeah.
Mandarin marmalade is my absolute favourite. I had never made it before until I was researching my last cookbook, which was about community cookbook. 1930s cookbook from Melbourne that had a mandarin marmalade recipe, and it's the only marmalade I make now for myself. I love it. And the recipe is one of those where one of the issues with mandarin is the low pectin level. So the challenge with mandarin marmalade is setting it. And the recipe that I found used something like 10 mandarins of the normal size, the larger ones, with 2 lemons. And you boil them together, and if you can, you separate out the skin from the flesh and the pips, and you put all of the pips from the lemons and the mandarins in a small amount of water overnight to really bring out the pectin, and you use that water the next day to make your marmalade. But I can recommend having a go because the flavour of mandarin marmalade I think is brilliant.
Is that the process you're describing that was on the video that you were?
It's a very similar process, yes, very similar.
I'm not sure I could, with these little things, I'm not sure I could try that, but I'm thinking about it over the week. You've inspired me. He wanted to give them to me today. I said, I can't make them today. Got to come straight off the tree. I'll come out on Monday.
Brilliant. Stephen, do you want to add anything to that, or Jane?
I think we now know why there's not too many commercially made kumquat marmalades, because because of the intense work. And I think if Beerenberg made it, it would be about $50 a jar perhaps, because they're slippery little suckers and take a lot of work. So,
Made with love.
but it is actually a beautiful, beautiful marmalade. Kumquat.
I do think mandarin marmalade is so subtle. I think what you've described, Liz, is just it sounds so delicious. But when you do get a good mandarin marmalade, it has this incredibly subtle taste, and you can tell it's wonderful.
And having them freshly picked, Victoria, you're on the right path. That is really, really critical. So if you're doing that, it's a good start.
I kind of knew that anyway, but I got that from that Mr. Tolley's video that you posted.
Yeah.
Found both of those videos incredibly helpful.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Okay, thank you, Victoria. Next up, we've got Judy. Judy is asking a question. I think it's about setting. So Judy, you've written your question in the chat, but maybe if we can just put you up, you can ask it directly. Here is Judy. Hello, Judy. Kate's going to turn your microphone on. Or you can turn your microphone. There you go. Welcome, Judy.
Has that worked?
Yes, it
Good.
does. Hello.
Hello, everyone. My marmalade from 2019 has set beautifully. It reached 105 degrees centigrade. It gelled beautifully, and it's remained in its jar. It's fine, but now when I tip the jar sideways, I get a syrup forming on the outside between the jar and the set marmalade. Why might that be happening?
Stephen, do you want to answer that?
It's called in the trade cineresis.
Oh, okay.
It's the
Cineresis.
Cineresis. I can't spell it. I can only tell you what it's called. It's kind of the pectin that's set is releasing the sugar syrup.
Mm-hmm.
We get it in commercial. If you ever get a commercial marmalade and take a spoon out, the next day, once you've broken the top of it, you'll get that sugar syrup. That's what happens when you break the thing called cineresis. Still eat it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the sugar, the pectin kind of forcing out the sugar solution.
So would that mean there's too much pectin in the jam?
It could also be caused by motion, or if sometimes we test, years ago, we used to test our set in someone's boot of their car. Because our stuff goes all over Australia, all over the world, you got to check what it's like after a week in someone's boot to see if the pectin's been affected. But it can be too much pectin can cause it as well.
And that could possibly be because I have my own trees and they are absolutely packed with pectin, you know, that thick glugginess that you get from them. And I just wondered whether that may have been that there was just too much pectin in the jam.
Could possibly be.
Possibly. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Oh,
I
that
have a
sounds
little
like a nice
funny story. I sent some to my father in Queensland, and he rang me and he was very upset. He said, "I think the people at the airport have been trying your jam." And I said, "Why, Dad?" And he said, "Because the jam has shrunk in the jar and it's got all this syrup around the outside of it." And I wondered whether being in an aeroplane flying from Sydney to Brisbane, whether the impact of the aeroplane may have some impact on the jam.
Travel can definitely cause it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Because your pectin set's been interfered with, it's kind of it's not stable anymore. Because all that movement and stuff, so that will cause it. However, we do a lot of tasting, and it doesn't seem to affect everyone that's been posted in. So
no,
yeah, I think it's back to the recipe, and it can cause that. And
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Now, Linda has another question. Linda, shall we put you back on just to ask you a question about the perennial question about how much set is too much? So, Linda.
Yes, my question is, I find I don't have any problem getting my marmalade to set so far, but I worry that sometimes I've made it too set. I understand this couldn't be a number of issues. It could be the amount of pectin, could be the amount of cooking time, but certainly we want the marmalade to stay on the toast. We don't want it too runny and run off the sides, but what is too set? Do you understand my question?
when I can answer this one. Well, I hope to. When you put your spoon in and you put it on your plate, there's a little bit of wobble there. If it's too overset or too overcooked, it goes a bit cloudy and a bit. You can see it's not clear and transparent almost, and that beautiful. Just when you that jelliness of when you spread it on your toast, it kind of disappears over your toast. If it's too much, it doesn't look nice either. You can tell it's too overcooked, too high in bricks, too high in sugar.
Okay.
I think that's where you want to be. It's that nice little wobble almost.
All right, then will that travel well if I'm posting it, which I will be doing?
As I said with the previous lady, that we haven't had too much trouble, but definitely don't send it the next day. Let it set. And Beerenberg is a big thing. You can't send, we've short of stock of a few things at the moment because of the demand. You can't send anything with pectin in it next day. You got to make sure it's set. Otherwise, it will never regain its set once it's been broken.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope it helps.
Did you want to say anything, Liz or Jane, on that question?
I do remember one year we had a jar that was entered, and it was so solid. It was so solid you couldn't actually get a spoon into the marmalade.
I remember that.
And so I think that's obviously when it's gone too far. But yes, it's all about the joy of the texture, I think, too, that actually when it is just at that moment of really good set, but not too solid and not too runny, there is a real pleasure. Maybe I'm being a bit too sort of idiotic about it, but there is a real pleasure in spreading a really well set marmalade on a bit of bread. It just works and it makes you feel satisfied because it's, you know, it's not too hard, not too soft.
You know, Jane, even people who have made preserves for years and years and years will get it wrong sometimes. Sometimes you just, you know, everybody has a bad day when it comes to setting. It's you know, it can actually be a bit challenging because what works one year with one batch of fruit, and you do exactly the same thing the next year because the fruit is slightly different in its, you know, in pectin levels, or you know, there's variables you can't control, and you think you've done everything exactly the same, and it just comes down, I think, to the more experience you've had, you start to know. Unless you go down the route of using thermometers and, you know, some of the more sort of technological tools that are available now to to home cooks in particular I'm talking about. You know, people like my mother didn't have a thermostat anywhere in the kitchen. It was all, and you know, for an awful lot of her married life, she didn't even have a freezer to put the plate in to sort of chill and set, you know, check sets quickly. So, you know, they had to develop their own way of being.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got one more question. Oh, sorry, Jane, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Oh, okay. So we're coming to the end of the session. So there's one last chance to post a question or ask if you'd like to address the panel directly. Victoria is going to come back and ask a question about feedback. So I'll just put you on, Victoria.
Thank you. I would like to thank the judges for the feedback. I'm a carer for a very elderly parent and I can't enter for the last couple of years, but a few years ago, 4 years ago, when I did my first entry, I drove the office mad. When will I get the feedback? I can see now via the number of entrants, you've got to wait. However, I learnt so much from that feedback. Just a few sentences about the you know, not using old jars and the peel not being set in one, because I've had about 5 or 6 entries, different ones. And I learnt so much. I look at it, I've kept that feedback, and I want to encourage you to keep giving feedback because people can't improve. And I hope they value the feedback that I got from you in my first effort, because I'm busting to have another go. Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, Jane or Liz, do you want to address that? Because I know you work very hard, and Stephen, I'll let you all have a go. Jane first.
I think that feedback is everything, and it also reflects the fact that we take every single jar that's entered very seriously, and we take great care with it. And I know that both in Australia and in the UK, from the moment we receive it and unwrap it, it's almost like it is that person who sent it, you know, and we want it to succeed. We're not in the business of being negative for negative's sake. What we want is for people to learn and just get better and better, because that's fun. And so I think that the feedback has always been absolutely one of the central things in the whole process. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, we judge in pairs and we talk about the feedback. And I mean, judging takes a long time because we have these discussions and, you know, about the feedback that we'll put onto the form for people and the marmalade itself. So a lot of thought goes into doing that. So we're glad that it's appreciated.
Well, I'm a member of a Toastmasters club where we do and practice and we get evaluated and we learn from that evaluation. So I've got a number of speeches that I've done called The Value of Feedback, where I have used my marmalade experience and built up the tension about waiting for the feedback. How can I get better? And when it came, so I analysed it and I evaluated it, and I could tell them now, I can demonstrate to people, having got the feedback, I know exactly what I've got to do next time. So it's so valuable, and thank you for that effort that you put in.
Thank you. And Stephen, would you like to add to that?
I think it was the second year, one of the CWA ladies said to me, she said, "Oh, I wouldn't like to feed you for a week. You try everything." I certainly do. We certainly do try everything, don't we, Jane? Whether they look a bit not so good on the outside, if someone's made the effort to make it, we will try it. I think we had a marmalade with the addition one. We had the, and I hope it wasn't yours, Victoria, it was the Parmesan cheese marmalade.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
That was quite different, but we still tried it. I can still taste it now.
We have tasted some very exotic things over the years. I can remember a marmalade made with a 70-year-old fortified Chinese wine, which was a completely different flavour profile to anything I've ever tried before. So we are quite adventurous, all of us, I think, in the judging.
Indeed, and extremely hard-working too. Our judges work extremely hard, and as Liz said, it takes a long time because they're very thorough. I've got 2 more questions. One from Shona. If we can get Shona on. It's a question about setting. I'm not sure if Shona is there. Kate? Yes. Hello, Shona.
Hello.
Yes. Do we have Ah, yeah, there you are. Hello.
I'm really enjoying this, thank you. And it seems such a basic question, but I wonder if you could go through the reliable steps for reaching setting point. It's such a tricky part of the process.
Who wants to handle that one?
Stephen, go on.
Well, the setting, there's a few things you can look at setting. What makes a good set is cooking as a marmalade is almost a chemistry. One thing has to be, if one thing's not right, it can upset your set. For instance, if your marmalade's not cooked enough, it won't set because the sugar hasn't been quick, Liz. I've gone a bit brain dead here.
Well, it's part of the sugar and the water levels. So you need a certain amount of evaporation.
Correct.
So
actually, if you haven't had enough boil off.
Yeah. So rapid enough boil for long enough. And one of the things that is part of this process is the longer it takes you to reduce the amount of water, evaporate that from any kind of preserve, the darker it goes. So you actually getting that proper rolling boil. It's not just a gentle simmer, it's a proper continuous rolling boil. Will speed up the process and you'll reach setting faster while retaining a bright colour.
And the other major thing that will affect your set is your pH level, is your acidity, your lemon juice or something that you can put in to lower your pH. If it's too high, that may affect your setting as well.
Okay, Jane.
And if you're adding, sorry, if you're adding things like alcohol, that can also upset the set.
Absolutely, alcohol is very pectin. Very alcohol and pectin they don't like each other.
Okay, Jane, did you want to add anything to that conversation?
Well, I think it's interesting that a jam pan is shaped in the way that it is, so that you've got that sort of that shape, so that you're actually the water is boiling off in the correct manner, whereas the straight up and down ones, isn't that right, Liz? And
yes,
so
a proper jam pan is narrower at the base than at the top of at the rim. And that angle does increase the rate of evaporation and allow you to have that rolling boil rather than just a quiet simmer.
So I think, and the only other thing I would say is that actually you can also hear, if you listen to your marmalade, I know this sounds a bit weird, but there is a wonderful scrunching sound. There's a moment where I reckon, yeah, this is ready. And that, I don't know what the technical term is for that.
I like scrunching is good.
It's technical, that's good.
And it's fantastic because you think, bingo, we're there.
And if you have a thermometer, what's the ideal temperature, Stephen, that people are working towards? Because I don't cook with a thermometer when I'm preserving, but I know there is a temperature if you have one that you aim for.
Well, at work we get everything to 95 degrees, but home cooks, I wouldn't even know what home cooks use. We get it to 95 and hold it for 10 minutes after cooking it, and that's good enough commercially.
I think it's a little higher for home cooks.
Probably 110, I would think.
Yeah, I think 100. I have 105 or 6 in my head.
105 is what in most recipe books.
Yes. So that is one way to do it, and you can go to a kitchen shop and get yourself a little thermometer. That will help. I think you can tell. You shouldn't be stirring it too frequently, but I think you can tell with the way a wooden spoon works through the saucepan. The sort of level of resistance gives you a clue, and again, that just comes with experience. And then, of course, the traditional testing methods of the cold saucer and setting it aside for, a minute to see if you can see it starting to gel. But I guess what you could, I have seen people take the same batch and take some out at different time spans, just in a preliminary batch, just to test. But again, there's so many variables that just because you get it right one time doesn't mean it's going to be the same the next time.
But that's the joy of marmalade. It's
Yeah.
a journey every
Thank you very
time.
much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shona. We've got one more person who's asked 2 questions to wrap up. So Irene, hopefully you can ask your 2 questions that you've posted in the chat. We'll connect Irene to the video.
Just while you're collecting, Irene, I really would recommend everybody to watch Ali's video, because she does step you beautifully through, and it's nothing like seeing. You know, she actually shows you as she goes through the process and is judging the setting. And it's incredibly helpful to watch that. So I'd really encourage you to go onto the marmalade.net.au site and watch that.
She's very good. She's very good.
Excellent. All right. So yes, that's good homework. So Irene, you had 2 questions.
Just regarding the competition, just wondering about entering in the artisan range. Could I enter 2 different jars of Seville from 2 different batches? Maybe one a harder set, one a slightly softer set. Is that allowed?
Absolutely. Yes, Jane. Yeah.
I think that's often a good idea, because I think that this is part of the artisan journey, is trying to decide which way your marmalades are going and what you most like and what works. Yeah. It's exciting to perhaps have it in a competition where there are people judging it and saying, you know, particularly Stephen with his experience.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. And the other question was, because I've got a Scottish background, I tend to read more Scottish recipes or UK recipes as well as the Australian ones. And a lot of the UK use clementines. Now, you can't get clementines in Australia. So I asked a few of the fruit and veg guys, and I'm getting different answers as to what the Australian equivalent of a clementine is. Apart from, they generally say a mandarin, but is there a specific type of mandarin?
Well,
Ian Tolley question.
Well, a mandarin is the closest we have to a clementine. And I don't know that there's that big a difference in the limited number of mandarins available in greengrocers in terms of flavour.
Yep.
I've experimented making marmalade with the 2 main ones that are readily available, and I haven't been able to pick the difference, except for one has more seeds than the other. And I prefer, I wish I can't remember which variety it is now, but you know, the more seeds, the more pectin I've got to play with. So, which with mandarins is critical. So, I think that's, I mean, you're right. There's a lot of cookbooks we get from England. Jamie Oliver seems to use clementines in every second recipe. Yeah. And I think that's the closest that we've.
Stephen, do you have a view on that?
I'll go along with whatever Liz says. Obviously, I've never heard of them in Australia. I've heard of them, obviously, in cookbooks and cooking shows, and they sound exquisite, don't they? Clementine marmalade.
Yeah, it's got a lovely name.
And I mean, I quite often just when I'm not making marmalade, I quite often just substitute oranges, because I'm very lucky to have my own orange tree these days, and I can pick it straight off the tree and put it straight into into what I'm making. But in terms of marmalade, I think mandarin is the closest that you'll get.
Okay. And I just wanted to say, I'm one of those mad people that make kumquat marmalade.
Oh, well done, well done. That's really hardcore. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Irene. Okay, I'm going to call it to an end there. It's been fantastic. I hope you all have enjoyed it. I'd like to thank our judges for their time, their enthusiasm and their knowledge. So Jane, Stephen and Liz, you can give them a virtual clap to thank them for sharing their knowledge. What we can do, if you have more questions, I suggest you email them to us at marmalade@nationaltrustsa.org.au. The address is on the website. Is there any final words our panel would like to say?
Get cooking. Get cooking.
Get cooking. Okay.
And don't be frightened about using your imagination. I mean, I've quite often get given the marmalade with a twist class to judge, and I just love to see the boundaries that people push. And I would love to see some marmalades made with native bush, alternative ingredients. That would be so exciting.
I must say in the twist class though, if you say it's got whiskey in it, it needs to taste like whiskey. I think, Jane, we've had a few, it'll say it's got an additive in it and you can't find it.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think just to add, thank you, because I think that marmalade is such a complicated process, and to actually give up a jar for this competition is hugely wonderful, and we love getting it. So keep sending it.
On that note, fabulous way to end. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Liz, and thank you all for tuning in. The recording will be up on the website, so you can listen again if you want to. And we look forward to seeing all your entries